In this lesson, we'll talk a little bit about topology specifically for animation. So when we talk about having topology that's optimized for animation, what that means is we need to have edges in the right place so that our characters and objects can deform properly. So when we create a model, obviously we want to try to get the shape and make it look like a particular thing or a particular character using the geometry that we have. But we also want to put geometry in the right place so that that character can deform properly. So if we have, for instance, a leg in here that's going to be bending, in the areas where it's going to be deforming, we want to have sufficient topology. Okay, if we don't have the right kind of topology or it's routed in the wrong direction, we can get undesirable deformations and it can become very difficult to rig and animate that particular character. If we have enough resolution that is in the correct configuration, it can make it a lot easier to get good deformations. Okay, so they need to be going in the right direction. We also need sufficient topology. So here we've got a bend that we want to happen at this joint. Now we only have a couple of lines in here to work with. So as this bends, we're only going to be able to move these two edges to get that particular bend, and that can cause collapsing on the joints and things like that. So you want to be careful of that. Now also we want to think about where we need the geometry. So here we have a leg that is pretty straight, and so we have not very much resolution in here on the joint and a lot of resolution in this long straight area that's not going to deform at all. So it's kind of backwards of what we want in most cases. Most cases we want to have maybe a little bit extra geometry in those areas where it's going to deform, and then we can come in here and maybe have a little bit less geometry in these areas because we know that this leg, for instance, is not going to bend. So I can go ahead and maybe delete some of those edges and keep the rest of these up here. Now that's if we're talking about a typical joint where we have a bend happening here and then we have a long straight bone that's bending. Then we would maybe come in here and add a little bit more resolution in this joint because that's going to be bending. If you have a joint that is going to be bending like a tentacle, let's say, then you want to have a little bit more like this where it's evenly spaced out, okay? And that way you give the rigger and the animator enough topology, enough resolution to work with, and the topology will flow in the right direction. So in this case, if we want it to bend this way, then we want to have those lines sort of perpendicular to the bend, and then we want to have those lines flowing along here to keep that shape. Okay, we don't want to have any strange turns or anything like that where we're doing our bending. All right, and so those are some things to think about with joints. You just want to have sufficient resolution in those joints where you're going to actually deform the model. And then in areas where you've got maybe this long straight bones, then you don't need as much resolution to be able to get that. Now in a lot of cases, quads will produce better deformations. So that's just something to think about when you're thinking about quads versus triangles. Sometimes if you have triangles in the wrong spots, you can get some pinching when you go into rig and animate your character. And so quads typically, in addition to subdividing better, a lot of times they will deform better as well if you're talking about a character. Now another thing to think about is, not just on these sort of tube shaped limbs where we've got joints and we just want to add resolution. You also want to think about any other ways that the character is going to deform. If you have muscles that are going to be deforming, or pieces of the character that are going to be deforming in a particular way, you won't be able to deform a character if their resolution is not there, if the topology is not flowing in the right direction. So for instance, looking at this face, you can see that we've got it set up for animation to be able to close the eyes. So we've got these closed loops so the rigger can weight the points around the eyes and be able to close those, and there's enough lines in there to be able to stretch those out to close the eyes, for instance. There's enough topology in there and it's flowing in this closed loop to be able to achieve that. Same thing on the mouth. We've got enough resolution in here and it's flowing in the right direction to be able to close and open the mouth, and then also get those mouth shapes that we may want to get with to create the character talking or doing some sort of facial expressions and things like that. Now, one really important edge loop in here is kind of these loops coming right around from right behind the nostril, on top of the nose, right around the side of the mouth. And this is important because when our character smiles, you'll get that distinctive line, that smile line right in here, right underneath this this little bit of fat that's skin that's up here that kind of goes over the nose, kind of the nasolabial fold there. You'll get this kind of line as we crease it up. And so if your geometry is flowing, let's say from here, and it goes actually over here, okay, from right here, and it curves around, and you don't have this line flowing down, there's no way at all to get that wrinkle, which is very important for showing a smile. So that's one of the places that you want to be careful of in creating the topology flow. And so I've seen a lot of people when they build heads, they'll actually build that in very, very early on. If they're doing box modeling, build that in very early on. But you do want to make sure to have that in there. If you're working with some sort of a human face, you want to be able to get the same sort of wrinkling and so forth on the face. And so you want to build your topology like that, because if you don't have resolution, you're not going to be able to get that wrinkle in there. Okay, you look talking about something over here, you're not going to be able to get anything inside here because you don't have any resolution there. You don't have any geometry, no edges. So you want to be careful of that too when you're working with faces. Okay, and the face is a little bit more intricate than maybe the rest of the body or a creature or something. But again, just something to be aware of when you're doing animation. You want to think about how the character is going to deform, and then build your topology accordingly. So not only will it capture the shape of the model, but it'll also give you, or the rigger or animator, control over that specific area of the model to be able to deform it cleanly and in the right direction, and that there's enough geometry there to get, let's say the eyes closing or the arm bending. You want adequate geometry in there to be able to achieve that. Okay, so there's really a lot to think about when you're working with topology, but those are just a few things. And so I hope you've got a little bit, maybe some tips picked up over the last hour or so going over these things, talking about triangles and n-gons and stars, and then also here talking about topology for animation. And again, a lot of these tips were gleaned from the forums and also questions that we've gotten directly from students. And so hopefully you've picked up a few tips or things that you've maybe had questions about, things that maybe weren't as clear. And so hopefully that will help you as you go through your modeling process.